I changed the cloth this morning. It was smoking, not like incense smoke, you understand. The blessed white linen was actually burning from underneath. These tiny orange threads eating through the weave like something was writing on it from below. I've been doing this for 15 years, every 7th day without fail, and the cloth has never done this before. My hand keeps cramping up writing this. The pen slips. Must be the arthritis. Kneeling for 40 years does things to your joints, but it feels different today. Feels like something doesn't want me to write this down. Let me start properly. My name is Father Marcello Venturi, and I am the parish priest of San Gabriele, 43 kilometers northeast of Rome. It's a beautiful little church, really. 12th century stonework, angels carved into every arch, though some of them don't look quite right anymore. The parishioners think they're blessed to worship here. Most mornings, I think so too. Most mornings, I don't have to change a smoking cloth at 5:47 a.m., while the liquid fire underneath glows like the eyes of something that should never have received the sacrament of baptism. You have to understand, I never wanted this assignment. Fresh out of seminary, San Lorenzo, not the Gregorian, my grades weren't quite good enough. I requested Rome proper. Maybe the Vatican Archives or St. Peter's if I was lucky. Instead, Cardinal Lombardi called me into his office on a Thursday. This was March 2009. I was 28 and still believed the church had my best interests at heart. Still thought special assignment meant career advancement. He handed me a sealed envelope. Heavy paper, Vatican letterhead, the kind they use for excommunication notices. San Gabriele needs a priest, he said. Someone young. Someone durable. That word. Durable. Like I was a piece of equipment. Like I was being assigned to maintain something rather than shepherd souls. I should have asked what he meant. I should have asked why the previous priest left. I should have asked why Cardinal Lombardi couldn't look me in the eyes when he said it. Instead, I said, "Yes, Your Eminence." Like a good little seminarian, the envelope contained a single page. Not Vatican letterhead this time, just plain white paper, with 6 rules typed in red ink. Not handwritten, typed on an old machine, by the look of it, the kind with keys that strike hard enough to cut through carbon paper. No explanation, no theological justification, no biblical citations or canon law references. Just rules. The rules as I've come to think of them, because they're the only thing keeping me alive in this place. Rule 1. Never perform baptisms between sunset and sunrise. The fire burns brightest in darkness. I read that line maybe 12 times before my brain would process it. Fire? What fire? This was supposed to be a normal parish assignment. Pastoral care, weekly masses, the occasional wedding or funeral. But Cardinal Lombardi was already standing, already guiding me toward the door with his hand on my shoulder like a funeral blessing, like he was already burying me. The previous priest left detailed instructions, he said. Follow them exactly, Father Venturi. Exactly. The spiritual welfare of the parish depends on it. Brother Marcelino, that was the previous priest's name, though I wouldn't learn what happened to him for another 3 months. Wouldn't learn about the journal, the failed attempts to consecrate a new font, the reason his bedroom windows had been painted black from the inside. The parishioners thought he'd been transferred to missionary work in South Sudan. Pastoral care for refugees, they said. Very noble, very brave. The truth was behind a loose stone in the sacristy wall. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you about my first Sunday at San Gabriele. Mrs. Catalina Ricci approached me after my second Sunday Mass. I remember because I was still nervous, still stumbling over the gospel readings, with her infant daughter squirming in her arms. Father, we'd like to schedule little Sophia's baptism. Perhaps next Saturday afternoon. Saturday. My throat went dry. I'd been reading those rules every night for 2 weeks, trying to make sense of them. Rule 1 said nothing about Saturday afternoons, but Rule 2. Keep the font covered with blessed white cloth at all times. The cloth must be changed every 7th day. Why blessed? Why white? Why every 7th day exactly? The rules answered nothing and assumed everything. "Of course," I told Mrs. Ricci, though my voice cracked like a teenager's. "Let me check the schedule." I walked to the baptismal font. God help me, I walked right up to it like it was normal, like every church doesn't have baptismal fonts that require special handling, and lifted the corner of the white cloth. Just a peek, just to see what all the secrecy was about. The liquid underneath wasn't water. It moved like water, clear and clean as mountain spring. But when the afternoon light came through the stained glass windows and hit it just right, it flickered. Orange threads, like tiny flames dancing just beneath the surface, writing patterns that almost looked like cursive script in a language I'd never seen but somehow recognized. I dropped the cloth so fast I knocked over the holy water font. The sound echoed through the nave like a gunshot. Mrs. Ricci was still waiting, still smiling that patient smile mothers give priests when they're being slow. "Father, is Saturday good for Sophia's baptism?" "Saturday is perfect," I lied, and the lie tasted like copper pennies in my mouth. Because what else could I say? That the baptismal font contained something that wasn't water? That I was following rules I didn't understand to contain something I couldn't name? That her beautiful baby daughter would never be baptized in San Gabriele as long as I drew breath? That was 15 years ago. Sophia Ricci is 19 now, studying at the University of Bologna, still unbaptized. I tell the families we're having drainage issues, structural problems with the font's marble. Always next month, I promise. Always something needs to be repaired first. The lies are the worst part. Worse than the insomnia. Worse than the way my eyes water whenever I change the cloth. Chemical reaction. I tell myself, something in the detergent. Worse than the dreams where I'm drowning children in liquid fire while their parents watch and smile. The lies make me a coward, and cowards don't deserve the collar. But the alternative, Madonna mia, the alternative. I found Brother Marcelino's journal 3 months into my assignment. The sacristy stones were loose, 1970s renovation, shoddy workmanship, and I was trying to fix them myself rather than explain to a contractor why certain areas of the church were off-limits. Behind the third stone from the altar, wrapped in oilcloth like a relic, was a leather journal tied with a ribbon. The first entry was dated March 15th, 1994. The diocese has sent me to San Gabriele to replace Father Toretti. The parishioners speak of him fondly, though they seem confused about his sudden transfer. Cardinal Lombardi provided no details, only a set of unusual instructions regarding the baptismal font. "I am to follow certain protocols," he says, "for the spiritual welfare of the parish. I confess I do not understand, but obedience is the foundation of service." The handwriting was neat then, precise. By the final entries, it looked like something had been crawling across the pages. Day 2847. The cloth burned through again. Third time this month. The orange glow is getting brighter, or maybe my eyes are getting worse. Hard to tell. I can't remember the last time I slept through the night. The dreams, God in heaven, the dreams. Rule 4 is wrong. It has to be wrong. How can I shepherd this flock if I cannot look upon the font? But every time I try to peek during Mass, every time I forget and glance down while reading the Gospel, the fire sees me. It sees me, and it burns, and I wake up screaming with phantom flames behind my eyelids. If anyone reads this, if anyone comes after me, Rule 4 exists for a reason. Never look directly into the font during Massachusetts. Use the mirror. Always use the mirror. Rule 4. I hadn't understood that one either until I found the small makeup compact hidden behind the altar cross. A tiny mirror, positioned so the priest could check the font's cloth without looking directly down. Brother Marcelino's modification, his addition to Cardinal Lombardi's original protocols. The final entry in his journal was dated December 3rd, 2008. I cannot do this anymore. The fire is changing, growing stronger. Last night I dreamed that every child in the parish was standing around the font, their faces glowing orange, asking to be baptized, asking to come home. I woke up with burns on my hands. Real burns. I have written to Cardinal Lombardi requesting immediate transfer. Whatever is in that font, whatever the church is trying to contain, it requires someone younger, someone stronger, someone who hasn't spent 14 years staring into hell and pretending to offer salvation. God, forgive me for leaving this burden to another soul. Brother Marcelino was found dead in his rectory bedroom on December 10, 2008. Heart failure, the coroner said. Stress-related. The diocese held a lovely funeral service. They buried him in the Rome cemetery, far from San Gabriele, and never mentioned the journal or the rules or the reason his bedroom windows had been painted black. That was when Cardinal Lombardi called me. I've been Father Marcelino now for longer than I was ever myself. 15 years of checking the cloth, changing it every 7th day, watching for signs of orange glow or blue flame. 15 years of canceled baptisms and desperate lies and parishioners who think their priest is slowly losing his mind. Maybe I am. This morning, when I lifted that smoking cloth, I saw something I'd never seen before. The liquid fire, because that's what it is, liquid fire, no point pretending otherwise, was moving differently, swirling in patterns that looked almost like letters, like writing in a language that predates Latin, predates Christ, predates everything I was taught to believe about the nature of God and evil. And I swear, by all the saints and martyrs, I swear it spelled my name. Marcello, not Father Venturi, not even Father Marcello. Just Marcello, the way my mother used to call me before I took my vows. The way no one in this parish has ever called me. The way only something that has been watching me, studying me, learning me for 15 years would know to call me. I dropped the new cloth over the font so fast I stumbled backward into the pews. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a caged bird. The cloth settled normally. No smoke this time, just white linen covering whatever hell we're keeping contained in that ancient marble basin. But I could swear I heard laughing. Soft, gentle laughing, like a child finding something amusing. Rule 6 is about children. I hate Rule 6 most of all. Rule 6. If a child asks to see the pretty fire, they are no longer fully human. Contact Rome immediately. I learned that rule the hard way 3 years ago. Little Tommaso Alberti, 7 years old, tugging on my cassock after Sunday Mass. "Father Marcello," he said, and his voice was sweet and innocent and wrong. "Can I see the pretty fire in the water?" My blood turned to ice. No child should know about the fire. No child should be able to see through the blessed cloth, past the silver-lined marble, into the liquid flames beneath. But Tommaso was smiling up at me with eyes that reflected orange light, and I knew, God help me, I knew, that something else was looking out through his face. I called Cardinal Lombardi that night. "Emergency protocols," he said. "Special rights." Tommaso Alberti was transferred to a Vatican facility for spiritual counseling, and his parents were told he'd been selected for an elite Catholic boarding school. I haven't seen him since, but sometimes, late at night when I'm lying awake listening for sounds from the nave, I hear children laughing in the church. Always children, always that same soft, amused laughter that suggests they know something I don't. Something about the fire, something about the rules, something about why the church would rather contain evil than cast it out. This morning's smoking cloth has me spooked. 15 years of routine, 15 years of the same white linen lasting exactly 7 days before needing replacement. And now this. Change. Evolution. The thing in the font is adapting, learning, growing stronger. And I'm getting older. My vision isn't what it was. The insomnia is worse. Sometimes I forget which day I changed the cloth last, and I have to check my calendar 3 times to be sure. What happens when I make a mistake? What happens when I miss a day, or use the wrong cloth, or forget to bless the water in the drainage system? What happens when I become another brother Marcelino, writing desperate journal entries while phantom flames burn behind my eyes? I need to tell someone. I need to break the silence, violate whatever oath of secrecy keeps this horror contained. But who would believe me? And more importantly, who would survive the telling? Because I know now, after 15 years of watching and waiting and following the rules, that the fire in the font isn't just contained. It's contained for a reason. And that reason is getting stronger every day. The smoking cloth changed everything. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Couldn't pretend 15 years of routine was enough. That morning, Tuesday, October 15th, the feast of St. Teresa of Avila, though I only remember because I was supposed to deliver a homily about mystical visions and couldn't concentrate on anything but literal fire, I made a decision that would have horrified Brother Marcelino. I was going to research the font, not just the rules, not just the surface history that Cardinal Lombardi had provided in neat, sanitized paragraphs. The real history, the why behind the what, the reason that baptismal font had been corrupted, and why the Church chose containment over consecrating a new vessel. You have to understand, research was never my strength in seminary. I was a pastoral care student, not a historian. Give me a grieving family or a troubled marriage, and I could offer comfort, guidance, hope. But archival work, theological archaeology. I used to joke that I'd chosen priesthood over academia because Latin gave me headaches. Now Latin might be the only thing keeping me alive. I started with the obvious place, San Gabriel's parish records. Every Catholic church keeps meticulous documentation: baptisms, confirmations, marriages, deaths, property transfers, major repairs. It's canon law, and more importantly, it's how the Vatican maintains control. They know everything that happens in their churches, down to the price of communion wine and the cost of roof tiles. Except San Gabriel's records had gaps, big gaps. 1891 to 1894, completely missing. The pages weren't torn out. The binding showed no damage. They simply weren't there. As if those 3 years had never happened. As if the parish had been suspended in amber between Father Toretti's death in December 1890 and Father Benedetti's arrival in March 1894. 3 years and 4 months. Long enough for something terrible to occur. Long enough for the diocese to make decisions they didn't want documented. I found the first clue in the baptismal records themselves. San Gabriel averaged 12 to 15 baptisms per year in the 1880s. Farming community, large families, high infant mortality meant parents baptized quickly. But starting in 1895, the first full year after the missing period, the numbers dropped. 7 baptisms in 1895, 4 in 1896, 2 in 1897. Then, starting in 1898, something interesting. Baptisms resumed normal frequency, but they were all performed at San Michele, the church in the next village over. The entries were written in different handwriting. Father Benedetti's careful script noting, performed at San Michele due to font repairs over and over again, for 2 solid years. Font repairs that lasted 2 years. In the 1890s, when a skilled stonemason could carve a new baptismal font in 6 months. I checked the financial records. No payments to stonemasons. No bills for marble. No receipts for blessed oils or consecration materials. Whatever had happened to the original font, whatever had been done to repair it, the work hadn't been performed by any tradesman. That's when I remembered something Brother Marcelino had written in his journal. A single line, buried in a rambling entry about insomnia and phantom burns. The old books mention fire. Not holy fire, not the flames of Pentecost. Something else. Something that burns cold and writes words in languages that predate Adam. Old books. There had to be more records somewhere. Church archives go back centuries, and the Vatican never throws anything away. They might hide documents, classify them, bury them in sub-basements that require special permission to access, but they never destroy them. Information is power, and the church has been accumulating power for 2,000 years. I started checking other parishes. If San Gabriel's records were incomplete, maybe neighboring churches had mentioned the incident. Cross-references, shared correspondence, gossip between priests. Something always survived. San Michel's records were clean. Too clean. Father Benedetti's entries about the borrowed baptisms were the only mention of San Gabriel's problems, and they were written in that carefully neutral tone priests use when they're documenting something they don't fully understand but know better than to question. But Santa Maria del Carmine, 20 kilometers south, had a different pastor during the 1890s. Father Alessandro Grimaldi, and Father Grimaldi was apparently a gossip. His parish journal, personal observations mixed with official business, contained several interesting entries from 1892. March 17th. Received disturbing letter from Father Toretti's replacement at San Gabriel. He speaks of unusual phenomena during baptismal ceremonies, manifestations of flame that seem to respond to the sacramental words. I have advised prayer and fasting, but privately wonder if the diocese should investigate. Such things are not unknown in the Church's history, though usually better contained. April 2nd. No response to my letter of spiritual guidance. San Gabriel's new priest has stopped attending diocesan meetings. Brother Giuseppe visited last week and reports the church appears abandoned, though smoke rises from the rectory chimney. Most troubling. April 23rd. Cardinal Toretti, no relation to the deceased San Gabriel priest, despite the name, has issued instructions that San Gabriel is temporarily under special Vatican jurisdiction. No further contact with their pastoral staff is authorized without written permission from Rome. I confess this order troubles me deeply. What has occurred there that requires such isolation? Special Vatican jurisdiction that explained the gaps in the records, the missing documentation, the years of font repairs. Whatever had happened at San Gabriel in 1892, it had been severe enough to warrant direct intervention from Rome. I needed to see those Vatican files. Now, you have to understand, requesting access to Vatican secret archives, they call them the Vatican Apostolic Archives now, less ominous sounding, is not like checking out a library book. It requires specific academic credentials, detailed research proposals, letters of recommendation from church authorities, and approval that can take months or years. And that's for normal historical research. For classified files related to supernatural incidents, files that might contain information about demonic manifestations or failed exorcisms, I might as well have requested a private audience with the Pope. But I had one advantage, Cardinal Lombardi. He had assigned me to San Gabriel. He had given me the rules. He knew exactly what was contained in that baptismal font, and more importantly, he knew I'd been faithfully maintaining the containment for 15 years. If anyone could authorize access to the historical records, it would be him. I called his office on a Thursday. Same day of the week he'd given me the assignment, though I didn't realize the significance until later. The secretary, different woman now, Cardinal Lombardi, was in his 70s and went through assistance the way I went through blessed cloth. Put me on hold for nearly 20 minutes. Father Venturi. His voice had aged, acquired that papery quality elderly men get when their throats begin to fail. I trust San Gabriel continues to operate smoothly? Yes, Your Eminence. The protocols remain effective. A pause. Long enough for me to hear papers shuffling in the background. The sound of a man checking files he hoped never to open again. You are calling about the historical documentation, he said. Not a question. A statement. Like he'd been expecting this call for 15 years. The containment appears to be evolving, Your Eminence. Recent changes in the manifestation patterns suggest the situation may be becoming less stable. I believe understanding the original incident could help maintain effectiveness. More truth than I'd spoken to church authority in years. And Cardinal Lombardi heard it. You may access file classification 77 Alpha, he said. Palazzo San Callisto, Archive Level C, Section Historical Anomalies. Monsignor Cavalli will provide escort. You have 1 day, Father Venturi. 1 day to read what you must read. Then you return to San Gabriel, and you never speak of what you learn. Yes, Your Eminence. And Father. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. After you read those files, you will understand why we chose containment over consecration. Some things cannot be blessed away. Some things can only be managed. The line went dead. I took the train to Rome the next morning. First time I'd left San Gabriel in 3 years. Parish isolation becomes a habit after a while, especially when you're maintaining supernatural containment that could collapse if you're not there to perform routine maintenance. But I'd arranged for Father Rinaldi from San Michele to cover emergency calls, and the cloth had been changed 2 days prior. The font should remain stable for 48 hours. Should. That word has lost all meaning in my vocabulary. Palazzo San Callisto sits in Trastevere, technically outside Vatican City proper, but unmistakably church property. Renaissance architecture, beautiful gardens, the kind of place where cardinals live when they're too important for ordinary residences but not quite important enough for apartments in the Apostolic Palace. It also houses one of the Vatican's secondary archive systems, documents too sensitive for the main apostolic archives but not quite classified enough for the secret archives that don't officially exist. Monsignor Cavalli met me at the entrance. Thin man, probably my age but looking older, with the pale complexion and careful movements of someone who spends most of his time underground. His handshake was soft, uncalloused, the hands of a man who handles documents rather than people. "Father Venturi," he said, and his voice was neutral, professionally courteous. "Cardinal Lombardi has authorized limited access to historical classification 77 Alpha. You understand this material is highly restricted." "I understand, Monsignor. Follow me, please." "And Father." He paused at the elevator, studying my face like he was memorizing it. "What you read today must never be discussed outside these walls. Not in confession, not in prayer, not in your private journal. Some knowledge carries consequences." The elevator descended further than I expected. Archive level C was actually archive level basement, 3 floors beneath street level, accessed through corridors lined with climate-controlled storage rooms and staffed by librarians who looked like they hadn't seen sunlight in decades. File classification 77 Alpha occupied a single reading room, barely larger than a confessional, with fluorescent lighting that made my eyes water. The file itself was surprisingly thin, maybe 50 pages of documents, photographs, and what looked like hand-drawn sketches. "You have until 5 p.m., Monsignor Cavalli said. "I will return to escort you out. No photographs, no notes, no documents leave this room." Then he left me alone with the history of San Gabriel's damnation. The first document was a letter, dated October 15, 1891, from Father Giuseppe Toretti to Cardinal Francesco di Paola, Archbishop of Rome. "Your Eminence, I write to report incidents of supernatural manifestation during recent baptismal ceremonies at San Gabriel. On 3 separate occasions, the baptismal water has exhibited properties inconsistent with natural law. During the baptism of infant Maria Rossetti, October 3rd, the water appeared to ignite, producing flames that burned without consuming. The child was unharmed, but I confess myself deeply troubled. I have performed the standard purification rituals, replaced the water multiple times, and consulted the prescribed texts for dealing with demonic interference.
The manifestation continue.
I respectfully request guidance from the diocesan authorities, as this matter exceeds my pastoral experience." The response, dated October 22nd, was brief. "Father Toretti, Cardinal Toretti will personally investigate these reports. Suspend all baptismal ceremonies until further notice. Discuss this matter with no one outside church authority. Cardinal Toretti," the same surname as the San Gabriel priest, and Father Grimaldi had specifically noted they weren't related. Interesting that the church would send someone with the same name to investigate. Coincidence or something more deliberate? The next document answered that question. A formal investigation report, stamped with Vatican seals and signed by Cardinal Michel Toretti. Investigation summary: San Gabriel Parish, November 1891. Subject: supernatural manifestations during baptismal ceremonies. Initial findings: the baptismal font at San Gabriel Parish exhibits anomalous properties consistent with demonic influence. Water blessed according to standard ritual continues to manifest flame-like phenomena when in contact with unbaptized infants. Preliminary exorcism attempts have proven ineffective. Historical research: parish records indicate the current baptismal font was installed in 1347, following the Black Death outbreak that claimed 2/3 of the local population. The font was carved from marble donated by the estate of Count Alessandro di Montecroce, a local nobleman who died under circumstances that remain unclear in church records. Further investigation reveals Count de Montecros was investigated by the Holy Office in 1346 for suspected heretical practices, including participation in pre-Christian rituals and the practice of ceremonial magic. His death occurred during interrogation. His body was burned, but his estate, including the marble intended for San Gabriel's font, was considered cleansed through papal blessing. Assessment: the font appears to have been spiritually compromised from its installation. The recent manifestations suggest the contamination has grown stronger over time. Recommendation: complete exorcism of the church and consecration of a new baptismal vessel. That report was dated November 30th, 1891. But the file contained a second report from Cardinal Toretti, dated February 15th, 1892. Investigation Summary Addendum: San Gabriel Parish. The attempted exorcism of December 15th, 1891 has resulted in significant escalation of supernatural activity. The entity contained within the baptismal font has proven resistant to standard cleansing rituals. During the ceremony, the liquid within the font transformed into what can only be described as liquid fire, maintaining the properties of water while burning with flames that cause no heat but produce intense light visible through solid matter. Father Giuseppe Toretti was severely injured during the attempt. His eyes sustained damage from direct exposure to the supernatural fire. He has been transferred to Vatican medical facilities and will not return to active ministry. The entity appears to be bound to the font itself, not merely the water within it. Attempts to drain the vessel result in the immediate return of the liquid fire, suggesting the contamination is inherent to the marble structure. New recommendation: given the entity's resistance to traditional exorcism and the risk to further personnel, I recommend permanent containment rather than elimination. The font should remain covered and blessed barriers should be maintained to prevent the entity from expanding its influence beyond the immediate vessel. Containment rather than elimination. The birth of the rules. But the most disturbing document was the final report, dated March 10th, 1892. Investigation Summary Final. San Gabriel Parish. After extensive consultation with church historians and demonologists, the Vatican has determined that the entity within San Gabriel's baptismal font represents a class of supernatural being that cannot be destroyed through conventional means. The creature appears to be a form of spiritual parasite that feeds on the act of baptism itself. Specifically, the moment of spiritual transformation when a soul accepts Christ. Historical research into Count de Montecros' activities suggests he deliberately created this contamination as an act of heretical rebellion against the church. Documents recovered from his estate indicate he practiced a form of inverted baptism, using his own blood mixed with substances I will not name in this report, to create what he termed a permanent wound in God's grace. The entity grows stronger with each baptism performed in its presence. It learns from each ceremony, adapts to each attempt at cleansing, becomes more deeply rooted in the sacred space with every soul that approaches its vessel. This explains the escalation of activity over the 5 centuries since the font's installation. Final recommendation: San Gabriel Parish will be placed under permanent special jurisdiction. A priest specially trained in supernatural containment will be assigned to maintain the barrier protocols. No baptisms will be performed in the church. The entity must be starved of the spiritual energy it requires to grow stronger. Under no circumstances should the font be removed, destroyed, or subjected to further exorcism attempts. The binding appears to be localized to the marble vessel itself. Disturbing the containment risks releasing the entity into the broader environment. Cardinal Michel Toretti, Supernatural Investigation Division. Supernatural Investigation Division. I'd never heard of such a department, but given the Vatican's penchant for bureaucratic compartmentalization, that wasn't surprising. Somewhere in Rome, there were church officials whose entire job was dealing with things like the San Gabriel font. Things that couldn't be blessed away, couldn't be exorcised, couldn't be reasoned with or converted or forgiven. Things that could only be managed. The rest of the file contained technical documents, detailed drawings of barrier configurations, lists of approved materials for containment cloth, schedules for maintenance and monitoring. The rules, essentially, but in their original form. 6 protocols designed by people who understood exactly what they were containing and why it had to be contained rather than eliminated. But there was one more document. A single page, handwritten rather than typed, tucked into the back of the file like an afterthought. Personal note, Cardinal M. Toretti, December 1892. I have spent 9 months studying the entity at San Gabriel. 9 months of sleepless nights, phantom burns, dreams where children beg to be baptized in liquid fire while their parents watch and smile. I understand now why Count de Montecros chose this particular method of revenge against the Church. The entity is not merely demonic. It is specifically designed to corrupt the sacrament of baptism, the moment when a human soul formally enters the body of Christ. Every child who approaches that font, every family that requests the sacrament, represents a potential vector for the creature's influence. But here is what troubles me most. The entity has learned to be patient. It does not immediately corrupt or possess. It watches, studies. It learns the rhythms of faith, the patterns of devotion, the ways in which human souls approach the divine. I believe it is preparing for something. Some future moment when it will have learned enough about the nature of baptism, about the structure of grace itself, to expand beyond the confines of its marble prison. God forgive me, but I fear we are not containing a demon. We are containing something that is learning to become God. The priest assigned to San Gabriel will bear a terrible burden. He will watch families request a sacrament he cannot provide. He will lie to children who ask about the pretty light in the water. He will maintain barriers against something that grows stronger every day, something that whispers his name in languages that predate Christ. But he will serve a purpose greater than pastoral care. He will be the guardian standing between humanity and something that could corrupt the very nature of divine grace. May God have mercy on his soul, and may he grant him the strength to resist when the entity offers him everything he has ever wanted in exchange for 5 minutes alone with an unbaptized child. I closed the file with hands that were shaking. My throat was dry. My eyes burned from the fluorescent lighting, and I had the strangest sensation that I was being watched. Not by Monsignor Cavalli or the archive staff, but by something that had been studying me for 15 years. Something that had been patient, learning, preparing. Something that knew I had finally learned the truth. The train ride back to San Gabriel was a blur. I sat in the same seat I'd occupied that morning, watching the Roman countryside roll past, trying to process what I'd read. The entity in the font wasn't just some random demonic manifestation. It was a weapon, a carefully crafted tool designed to corrupt the fundamental sacrament of Christian faith. And I was its prison guard. By the time I reached San Gabriel, the sun was setting. I unlocked the church and went directly to the baptismal font, not even bothering to turn on the lights. The white cloth was exactly as I'd left it, properly positioned, apparently undisturbed. But when I lifted the corner to check the drainage system, Rule 5, ensure the blessed water continues flowing beneath the font, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The liquid fire was writing again. Not my name this time, but words in Latin. Perfect ecclesiastical Latin, the kind taught in seminaries, the kind used in official church documents. Baptizo te in nomine Patris, the opening words of the baptismal ceremony. I baptize you in the name of the Father. The entity had been listening to me. For 15 years, it had been listening to every Mass, every prayer, every Latin phrase I'd spoken in its presence. It had learned the language of the Church, the structure of the sacraments, the words that opened a human soul to divine grace. And now it was practicing. I dropped the cloth and stumbled backward, knocking over the holy water font just as I had 15 years ago during my first week. The crash echoed through the nave, and I swear I heard something respond. Not laughter this time, but something worse. Something that sounded like singing, like a choir of children's voices, sweet and pure and wrong, singing the baptismal hymn we use for Easter Vigil. I ran. God forgive me. I ran from my own church like a coward, leaving the lights off and the door unlocked, fleeing to the rectory where I could lock the windows and draw the curtains and pretend that the soft singing wasn't following me. But it was. Through the walls, through the stone and mortar and blessed barriers, I could hear children singing about water and fire and the washing away of original sin. And I knew, with the terrible certainty that comes from 15 years of watching and waiting and following rules without understanding their purpose, that the entity was no longer content to simply be contained. It was ready to baptize someone. The question was, who would be foolish enough to ask? The answer came 3 days later, in the form of 8-year-old Tommaso Alberti and his grandmother, Signora Elena. I was in the rectory kitchen, forcing myself to eat breakfast I couldn't taste, when I heard the church bells. Not the automatic chimes that mark the hours, manual bells, someone pulling the rope in the bell tower. 3 slow tolls, pause, 3 more tolls. The traditional signal parishioners use when they need immediate priestly attention. My coffee cup shattered on the floor. No one was supposed to have access to the bell tower. I changed those locks myself after the incident with Sister Esperanza. The only keys were mine, hanging on the hook beside my bedroom door, and I checked. The keys were gone. I ran across the courtyard to the church, my cassock catching on rose bushes I hadn't trimmed in months, my breath coming in short gasps that had nothing to do with physical exertion. The main doors were standing open, morning sunlight streaming across the nave, illuminating dust motes that danced like spirits in the air. And there, kneeling in the front pew with her back to me, was Signora Elena Alberti, 83 years old, widowed, grandmother to half the children in the village. She came to daily mass when her arthritis permitted, always sat in the same pew, always wore the same black dress she'd owned since her husband's funeral 15 years ago. Beside her knelt a boy I'd seen but never met. Small for his age, dark hair, wearing clothes that were clean but obviously secondhand. He was staring at the baptismal font with the focused intensity children reserve for things adults tell them not to touch. "Signora Alberti?" I called, my voice echoing strangely in the nave. "How did you get into the church?" She turned, and I saw tears streaming down her weathered face. "Father Venturi, forgive me. I used the key from the sacristy. I know where Father Benedetti used to hide it. But it's an emergency, Father. This is my grandson, Tommaso. He needs to be baptized." My throat closed. "Signora, I'm afraid. He's dying, Father." Her voice broke. "The doctors in Rome, they say maybe 2 weeks, maybe less. The cancer, it's everywhere now. His parents, they're not believers. They refused to have him baptized as an infant. But now..." She reached out and took the boy's hand. "Now he says he wants to meet God. He wants to be baptized before he dies." Tommaso looked up at me with eyes that were too bright, too knowing. "The water is pretty, Father," he said, his voice clear and sweet. "It glows. Can you baptize me in the pretty water?" Every muscle in my body tensed. Rule 6. If a child asks to see the pretty fire, they are no longer fully human. Contact Rome immediately. But looking at Tommaso's face, pale from chemotherapy, innocent in the way dying children sometimes achieve, I couldn't see anything inhuman. Just a sick little boy who wanted to die with the assurance of salvation. "Signora," I said carefully, "when did Tommaso first mention the water?" "This morning. We were praying together, asking God for strength, and suddenly he said he dreamed of a beautiful church with water that burned like stars. He described this place perfectly, Father, down to the carved angels on the font. But he's never been here before today." The entity had reached him. Somehow, through dreams or visions or whatever method it used to extend its influence beyond the physical boundaries of the font, it had contacted a dying child and drawn him here. I should have refused. Should have explained that I couldn't perform baptisms in this church. Should have offered to arrange the ceremony at San Michele or Santa Maria del Carmine. Should have followed the protocols Cardinal Lombardi had established, called Rome, waited for instructions. Instead, I found myself walking toward the baptismal font. "The water does glow," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. But Tommaso, you must understand, this water is special. It requires very specific prayers, very careful ceremonies. And there are rules. The boy nodded solemnly. I know about rules, father. My nana taught me rules for praying and rules for being good and rules for talking to angels. What are the rules for the pretty water? I looked at the white cloth covering the font, thinking of Cardinal Toretti's warning about the entity learning to be patient, learning the rhythms of faith. Had it been planning this for 15 years? Drawing a dying child to my church, creating a situation where refusing baptism would violate every principle of pastoral care? The first rule, I said slowly, is that we must pray together before we begin. Will you kneel with me and your grandmother? Yes, father. We knelt in front of the font, Signora Alberti's rosary clicking softly as her arthritic fingers worked the beads. I began the preparatory prayers, the Latin words feeling strange in my mouth. Not because I'd forgotten them. I'd said these prayers thousands of times in other churches, before San Gabriel, before the rules, but because I could feel something listening. Deus, cuius spiritus super aquas inter ipsum mundi primordia ferbitur, the standard blessing of baptismal water. But as I spoke, I could hear my voice changing, developing harmonics that weren't natural, like a choir singing along, just below the threshold of hearing. Tommaso's head tilted, listening. The angels are singing, Father. Do you hear them? I stopped praying. The harmonics continued for 3 more notes, then faded. What do the angels sound like, Tommaso? Like children, like they're happy about something. He smiled, and for a moment he looked healthy, his cheeks pink with excitement instead of fever. They want me to see the pretty water, Father. They say it's time. Rule 2. Keep the font covered with blessed white cloth at all times. Rule 4. Never look directly into the font during Sunday Massachusetts. Use the wall mirror to check the cloth. But this wasn't Sunday Massachusetts, and the rules had been written to contain the entity, not to prevent a dying child from receiving the last sacrament before death. I reached for the cloth. Father Venturi. Signora Alberti's voice was sharp with concern. Your hands are shaking. They were. 15 years of handling that cloth, of changing it every 7th day, of checking the drainage system and maintaining the barriers, and my hands had never shaken. But now they trembled like autumn leaves, and I couldn't make them stop. I'm fine, Signora. It's been a difficult week. I gripped the edge of the cloth. Tommaso, when I lift this, you must not touch the water. Do you understand? You must not reach into the font until I say the proper words. I understand, Father. I lifted the cloth. The liquid fire blazed like a captive star, brilliant white gold light that somehow cast no shadows on the surrounding stone. But instead of the usual chaotic swirling I'd observed during my weekly inspections, the fire was moving in patterns. Deliberate patterns. Like script, like words. Baptizo te. The fire spelled out in flowing cursive. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Perfect liturgical Latin. The complete formula for baptism, written in supernatural flame that pulsed gently, hypnotically, like a heartbeat made of light. It's beautiful, Tommaso whispered. The angels wrote my baptism in the water, Father. They're ready for me. Signora Alberti crossed herself, tears flowing freely now. A miracle, she breathed. God is calling him home, Father. Please, you must baptize him now, while the angels are here. But I was reading Cardinal Toretti's warning in my mind. The entity has learned to be patient. It is learning to become God. This wasn't a miracle. This was a trap that had been 15 years in the making. The entity had studied me, learned my weaknesses, my pastoral instincts, my inability to refuse the sacrament to a dying child. It had reached out through dreams and visions to draw Tommaso here, had revealed just enough supernatural beauty to convince his grandmother this was divine intervention. And now it was offering me the one thing I could never refuse, the chance to save a child's soul. Tommaso, I said, my voice barely above a whisper, tell me about your dream. About the church with the pretty water. What else do you remember? The boy's eyes never left the font. "There was a man in the water, Father. A sad man with burned hands. He said he'd been waiting a long time for someone like me. Someone pure enough to help him. Help him do what? Help him baptize all the children who never got baptized. He said there are so many children who died without meeting God, and they're all waiting in the dark. But if I let him use my baptism, he can reach them. He can bring them all to God at once." My blood turned to ice. Count de Montecro's spiritual weapon wasn't designed to corrupt individual souls. It was designed to corrupt the sacrament itself, to transform baptism from a channel of grace into a vector for spiritual contamination. And it needed a pure soul, an innocent catalyst, to begin the process. A dying child willing to sacrifice himself to save others. "Tommaso, the man in your dream, did he tell you his name?" "Alessandro," the boy said simply. "He said his name was Alessandro, and he's been very lonely." Count Alessandro de Montecros. The entity wasn't just bound to the font, it was the count, or what remained of him after 5 centuries of supernatural existence. And it had been planning this moment since the day I arrived at San Gabriele. Rule 6. If a child asks to see the pretty fire, they are no longer fully human. Contact Rome immediately, but Tommaso was still human. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice. The entity hadn't possessed him, it had recruited him, convinced him that his death could serve a greater purpose, that his baptism could save countless souls. And the terrible thing was, Tommaso believed it, wanted it, was willing to die not just for God, but for the chance to help other children find salvation. I should have refused, should have grabbed the cloth and covered the font, taken Tommaso and his grandmother to San Michele, performed a normal baptism in clean water that didn't burn with impossible fire. But looking at the liquid flames spelling out the baptismal formula, listening to the distant sound of children singing, watching hope bloom on Signora Alberti's face as she witnessed what she believed was divine intervention, I made the worst decision of my life. "Very well," I said. "We'll perform the baptism, but we must do it properly, with all the traditional prayers and ceremonies. Tommaso, you must promise to do exactly as I say when I say it. The pretty water is holy, but it's also powerful. Do you understand?" "Yes, Father." I retrieved my ritual book from the sacristy, my hands still shaking. The pages fell open to the baptismal ceremony, not unusual since I'd referenced these prayers countless times in other parishes. But the ink seemed darker than normal, the Latin words standing out like they'd been freshly written. As I read the preparatory prayers, I could hear that strange harmonic resonance again. Not just from the font, but from the walls themselves, as if the entire church had become a resonating chamber for supernatural voices. Exorcizo te creatura aquae, the exorcism of the baptismal water. Ironic, considering I was about to immerse a child in water that contained an entity I couldn't exorcise. But as I spoke the words, something unexpected happened. The liquid fire began to change color, shifting from brilliant white gold to pale blue, then deeper blue, then violet. Colors that corresponded to the progression of traditional baptismal symbolism. White for purity, blue for heavenly grace, violet for penitence and preparation. The entity was responding to the prayers, not fighting them but harmonizing with them, learning their rhythm, their purpose, their spiritual significance. "Father," Tommaso said softly, "Alessandro says he's ready now. He says the water is blessed." "And what do you say, Tommaso? Are you ready?" The boy looked up at me with eyes that held no fear, only trust. "I'm ready to meet God, Father. And I'm ready to help Alessandro save the other children." I opened my mouth to explain why that was impossible, why he couldn't trust the voice in his dreams, why the entity in the font was not what it claimed to be. Instead, I heard myself say, "Then let us begin." Signora Alberti helped Tommaso approach the font. He was small enough that I had to lift him slightly so he could see over the marble rim, and as his face came level with the liquid fire, the entire church filled with light. Not the harsh fluorescent lighting of the Vatican archives, but warm, golden light that seemed to emanate from every surface. the kind of light you see in medieval paintings of the Nativity, soft and holy and impossible. Tommaso, I began, placing my hand on his forehead. Do you believe in God, the Father Almighty, creator of heaven and earth? I do, he whispered, and his voice carried perfectly through the nave, clear as cathedral bells. Do you believe in Jesus Christ, his only Son, our Lord, who was born of the Virgin Mary, was crucified, died, and was buried, rose from the dead, and is now seated at the right hand of the Father? I do. Do you believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Catholic Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, and life everlasting? I do. The liquid fire pulsed brighter with each response, and I could see words forming in its depths. Not Latin this time, but something older. Symbols that hurt to look at directly, script that seemed to move when I wasn't watching it. This was the moment, the choice Cardinal Toretti had warned about in his personal note. Resist when the entity offers everything you've ever wanted in exchange for 5 minutes alone with an unbaptized child. But the entity wasn't offering me anything. It was offering Tommaso everything. The chance to save souls, to serve God, to make his death meaningful beyond the simple tragedy of childhood cancer. And I was going to let it happen. Tommaso, I said, cupping blessed water from the drainage system beneath the font. Clean water, flowing water, water that had never touched the supernatural fire. I baptize you in the name of the Father. I poured the water over his forehead, and of the Son, more water, blessed and clean, and of the Holy Spirit. The church exploded with light, not the warm golden glow from before, but brilliant white radiance that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I was blind, deaf, overwhelmed by sensations that human senses weren't designed to process. And in that blazing moment, I heard Tommaso scream, not pain, pure joy, the sound of a child seeing something so beautiful it transcended language. His voice rose above the supernatural chorus that filled the church, clear and sweet and utterly human. Then the light faded, and I could see again. Tommaso was standing in front of the font, completely dry despite the water I'd poured over him. His clothes were clean, his face glowing with health, his eyes bright with knowledge that no 8-year-old should possess. And the liquid fire in the font had changed. Instead of the chaotic swirling I'd observed for 15 years, it now moved in perfect spirals, patterns within patterns, like a galaxy of flame contained in marble walls. And in its depths I could see faces, children's faces, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, all looking up at me with expressions of perfect peace. Thank you, Father, Tommaso said, and his voice carried harmonics that made the windows vibrate. Alessandro kept his promise. We can see them now, all the children who never got baptized. They're not in the dark anymore. I tried to speak, to ask what had happened, what he'd seen, what he'd become. But my throat was raw, my voice reduced to a whisper. Tommaso, are you? I'm still me, Father, but I'm also more now. We all are. He smiled, and for a moment I saw not just Tommaso but the faces in the fire, hundreds of children smiling with his mouth. Alessandro isn't sad anymore. He's not alone. And neither are they. Signora Alberti had been standing frozen throughout the ceremony, her rosary clutched to her chest. Now she stepped forward, reaching out to touch her grandson's face. Her hand passed through him like he was made of light. Nah, Tommaso said gently. I have to go now, but don't be sad. I'm not sick anymore, and I'm not alone. None of us are alone. He turned to me, and in his eyes I saw centuries of patience, decades of planning, and something else. Something that might have been gratitude. Father Venturi, you served your purpose well. The rules were necessary to keep Alessandro contained until the right moment came, until the right child came. Thank you for taking care of us. Tommaso, wait. But even as I spoke, he was fading, becoming translucent, dissolving into motes of light that drifted toward the baptismal font. Tell my parents I love them, he said, his voice growing distant. Tell them I'm safe. Tell them Alessandro is teaching us how to sing." Then he was gone, absorbed into the liquid fire that no longer seemed chaotic but purposeful, organized, alive with the souls of children who had found their way to God through the sacrifice of one dying boy. Signora Alberti collapsed into the front pew, sobbing. "He's gone. My Tommaso is gone." "No," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. He's saved. He's with God." But as I spoke the words, I remembered Cardinal Toretti's final warning. "I fear we are not containing a demon. We are containing something that is learning to become God." Had I just witnessed a miracle of salvation? Or had I helped an ancient entity consume the soul of an innocent child? Had Tommaso truly found peace? Or had he become part of something that was using his purity to disguise its true nature? The liquid fire pulsed gently in its marble prison, filled with faces that looked at me with expressions of perfect love. And I realized, with the terrible clarity that comes from 15 years of following rules without understanding their purpose, that I would never know the difference. In the distance, church bells began to ring. Not my bells, San Michel's bells, Santa Maria del Carmine's bells, every church bell in the valley, all ringing the traditional pattern for the death of a child. Except Tommaso wasn't dead. He was transformed, absorbed, saved or damned, depending on whether you believed Count Alessandro di Montecroce had truly learned to serve God or merely learned to imitate him perfectly. I covered the font with shaking hands, the blessed white cloth settling over liquid fire that now contained the souls of countless children. Tomorrow I would change the cloth, check the drainage system, maintain the barriers that might no longer be containing an entity but preserving a miracle. And I would continue to follow the rules, because after 15 years of faithful service, I finally understood their true purpose. They weren't designed to protect the world from what was in the font. They were designed to protect the font from the world. At least I hoped that's what they were for, because if I was wrong, if I had just helped an ancient evil consume the soul of a dying child, then God forgive me, I had become something far worse than a failed priest. I had become an accomplice to damnation. That was 6 months ago. I'm writing this in the rectory kitchen at 3:17 a.m. because sleep doesn't come anymore. Not since Tommaso. The coffee is cold. My handwriting keeps getting worse, and I can't stop checking the church through the window to make sure the white cloth is still in place. It is. It always is. But the cloth doesn't smoke anymore when I change it on Sundays. Doesn't char around the edges like it used to. Sometimes I wonder if that's because the fire has grown stronger or because it's grown gentler. The rules still apply, all of them, but they've changed, evolved, like living things adapting to new circumstances. Rule 1 remains the same. Never perform baptisms between sunset and sunrise. But now I understand it's not because the fire burns brightest in darkness. It's because that's when the children sing loudest. When Tommaso and Alessandro and all the others reach out to console dying children across the world, drawing them into dreams of glowing water and angelic voices. I've started keeping a log of deaths reported in the regional newspapers. Children's deaths. The pattern is unsettling. They all die peacefully now, between sunset and sunrise, with family members reporting that they spoke of beautiful dreams just before the end. Dreams of churches and holy water that burns like stars. Rule 2 has become more complex. Keep the font covered with blessed white cloth at all times. The cloth must be changed every 7th day. But now, when I lift the cloth for the weekly changing, the liquid fire arranges itself into words, messages, updates. Last Sunday, Maria Santos, age 7, leukemia, welcomed home. The Sunday before, Dmitry Volkov, age 5, accident. He speaks Russian now. Alessandro is learning. I've stopped reporting these messages to Cardinal Lombardi. His last letter made it clear that Rome considers the Tommaso incident resolved, and further communication regarding anomalous manifestations should be limited to genuine emergencies. Translation: don't tell us what we don't want to hear. Rule 3 has evolved. If the liquid glows orange, evacuate immediately. If it glows blue, pray the litany of saints until it dims. But it never glows orange anymore. Only blue, soft and steady, like a pilot light maintaining eternal vigil. The evacuation protocols seem almost quaint now, like emergency procedures for a disaster that's already passed. Rule 4 remains unchanged. Never look directly into the font during Sunday Massachusetts. Use the wall mirror to check the cloth. My damaged vision makes this easier now. I can't see the details clearly even when I try. Sometimes I wonder if that's a blessing or a curse. The faces in the fire are sharper now, more distinct. Tommaso's is always in the center, smiling with an expression of contentment that breaks my heart every time I see it. Rule 5 has become problematic. The fire cannot cross running water. Keep blessed water flowing in the drain beneath. The drainage system still works, but I'm not sure it's containing anything anymore. Last month, during the Feast of San Gabriel, I found the overflow drain blocked with rose petals. Red roses, the color of martyrdom. When I cleared them, they crumbled to ash in my hands, but they smelled like heaven. Rule 6 has become the most important. If a child asks to see the pretty fire, they are no longer fully human. Contact Rome immediately. Except now I understand this rule was written in fear by people who didn't recognize salvation when they saw it. In the past 6 months, 3 children have asked to see the pretty fire. All terminally ill, all peaceful when they died. 3 days later, with their families describing the same dreams of angels and burning water. I don't contact Rome anymore. I pray for their souls and trust that Tommaso knows what he's doing. The new rules write themselves, emerging from experience rather than institutional protocol. Rule 7. The cloth must be hand-washed in the sacristy sink, never sent to the diocesan laundry. When I tried to have it cleaned professionally once, it came back pristine white, but somehow wrong. Empty. The fire dimmed for 3 days until I blessed a new cloth with my own hands. Rule 8. Children under 12 who enter the church must be accompanied by parents or guardians at all times. Not because they're in danger, but because they see things adults cannot. Last month, little Sophia Marchetti pointed at the covered font and said, "The boy with the bright eyes wants to play." Her mother dragged her out in terror, but Sophia was smiling. She's 5 years old and perfectly healthy, but something in her recognition of Tommaso told me she won't stay that way forever. Rule 9. The parish records must reflect all baptisms performed in the church, but deaths following supernatural encounters should be recorded as natural causes. This isn't deception, it's mercy. The families of children who find their way to the font don't need Vatican investigators disrupting their grief with questions about miracles and manifestations. Rule 10. Trust the fire's judgment. This is the hardest rule, the one that keeps me awake at nights. Because sometimes I see movement in the liquid flame that suggests purpose beyond simple containment. Patterns that look like planning, preparation, expansion. Alessandro, or whatever Alessandro has become, is still learning, still growing, still reaching out to dying children across the world, offering them salvation or damnation disguised as divine mercy. And I'm still here, maintaining the barriers, changing the cloth, following rules that may be protecting a miracle or enabling an abomination. After 16 years, I still don't know the difference. What I do know is this: the children who die peacefully in their sleep, the ones who speak of angels and burning water in their final moments, their families find comfort in ways that transcend normal grief. Signora Alberti tends Tommaso's grave every day, but she's not mourning. She's waiting. She speaks to the headstone like he's listening, and maybe he is. He visits me in dreams, she told me last week after evening Massachusetts. He's not alone anymore, Father. None of them are alone. The church has stopped sending visiting priests to San Gabriel. Official reason: budget constraints and reduced diocesan personnel. Unofficial reason: Father Rinaldi reported atmospheric disturbances during his last attempt to conduct Sunday Mass, and Monsignor Cavalli decided the parish was better served by a single, dedicated priest who understood the local conditions. So I celebrate Mass alone now, preaching to parishioners who come for comfort they can't name, administering sacraments in the shadow of a baptismal font that contains either the greatest miracle or the greatest heresy in the history of the Church. The singing has gotten louder. Not during the day, never during the day, but in the hours between midnight and dawn, when the barrier between worlds grows thin. Children's voices, pure and sweet, rising from the liquid fire in harmonies that make the church windows vibrate. Sometimes I stand in the nave at 3 a.m., listening to Tommaso lead his celestial choir, and I wonder if this is what heaven sounds like. Other times, I remember Count Alessandro di Montecro's 500-year plan and wonder if I'm listening to the perfect imitation of heaven, performed by an entity that has learned to counterfeit God so convincingly that even the saved souls it consumes believe they've found paradise. The doubt is the worst part. Not knowing whether I've spent 16 years serving God or serving something that wears God's face like a mask. But then I think of Tommaso's smile in those final moments, the joy in his voice when he spoke of helping other children find their way to salvation. I think of the families who find peace after losing their children to cancer and accidents and genetic diseases, the comfort they derive from dreams of their babies singing with angels. If this is damnation, it's a damnation indistinguishable from grace. If this is a miracle, it's a miracle that grows stronger with every child it saves. And if this is something else entirely, something beyond human understanding of salvation and damnation, then I suppose I'll continue to serve it faithfully, following rules that evolve like prayers, changing cloth that no longer burns, maintaining barriers that may have become gateways. The font pulses gently in the darkness beyond my kitchen window, filled with liquid fire that burns with the light of countless souls. Tomorrow I'll change the cloth again, check the drainage system, document any new messages that appear in the flame. Tomorrow I'll serve Mass for parishioners who come seeking comfort they can't name, in a church that harbors either the greatest miracle or the greatest deception in salvation history. Tomorrow I'll continue to be Father Marcello Venturi, priest of San Gabriele Parish, keeper of rules that protect either heaven or hell. And maybe, if I'm blessed or cursed enough, tomorrow I'll finally understand the difference. But tonight, at 3:33 a.m., with the children's choir singing beyond the veil and the liquid fire pulsing like a captured star, I'm content to serve without understanding. After all, faith has always required a certain blindness, and perhaps, after 16 years of faithful service, I've finally learned to see clearly in the dark. Note written in margin, different handwriting. Father Venturi was found dead in the rectory kitchen on March 15th, apparently of natural causes. The parish records show him to be 52 years old, though he appeared much older at the time of death. Cardinal Lombardi has ordered the church to be sealed pending investigation. The baptismal font was found covered with a white cloth that showed no signs of burning or supernatural activity. Local authorities report no irregularities. The diocese has appointed Father Giuseppe Toretti as interim administrator. He is the nephew of the late Cardinal Toretti and has experience with sensitive ecclesiastical matters. Monsignor Cavalli, Diocese of Roma. Note written below in different handwriting. The cloth was clean when we found it, but it smelled like roses, red roses, and something else, something like singing. I think I understand now why Uncle kept those personal notes. We're gonna need new rules. G. Toretti.